The chandeliers sparkled like constellations captured and caged above the grand ballroom, their golden light spilling over silk gowns, tailored tuxedos, and the glitter of champagne flutes clinking in polite laughter. It was the sort of night Richard Harrington had grown accustomed to. Another charity gala, with all the usual trimmings of wealth and obligation. His name carried the room as easily as his money did. At 32, he had built a tech empire sprawling across continents. His penthouse overlooking Puget Sound, a symbol of both achievement and boredom. Success had become a routine. The deals no longer thrilled him, the parties no longer surprised him, and every polished smile mirrored another. Tonight, he was already tired, though the evening had only begun. Jason Matthews, a business partner who mistook volume for charm, clapped Richard on the back hard enough to slosh bourbon dangerously, close to his suit sleeve. Another necessary evil. Jason laughed. Richard returned a practiced smirk, nodding as if agreement itself was currency, but his gaze had already wandered past the crowd, scanning for anything that might break the monotony. That was when he saw Hannah Wilson, his maid. She didn't belong among the sequins and champagne, yet she moved with a quiet authority as she directed catering staff. Her presence strangely magnetic, something in her posture, precise and unyielding, caught Richard's eye. Before he could dissect that thought, a small figure darted from behind a column and collided with his legs. He looked down in surprise at a girl no taller than his waist, 7 years old, with sharp brown eyes that studied him without fear. "You have a nice chest set, Mr. Harrington," she said simply. Anna appeared instantly, her usual composure cracked by flustered apology. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Harrington. The babysitter canceled last minute." "Sophie," Richard raised a hand, cutting her off. "No harm done." He looked again at the child, who still stared at him with an unsettling directness. "You play chess, Mom teaches me," Sophie said, her tone casual, as though discussing her favorite bedtime story. Anna's cheeks flushed. "Just the basics. I'll take her upstairs." But Richard was already intrigued. The bourbon in his veins loosened something restless. The party was the same old song, but this was new. "Nonsense," he said. "Let's see what she's got." 20 minutes later, they were on the garden terrace. The antique walnut chess set unfolded between them. Guests had drifted outside, eager for amusement, sipping cocktails as if watching a circus act. A billionaire against a little girl. Richard leaned back, grinning. "Let's make it interesting. $12 million if you win." The laughter was immediate and loud. Anna froze, her knuckles whitening around a serving tray. "Mr. Harrington, that isn't appropriate. It's just a game, Anna." He winked at the crowd, enjoying the ripple of laughter. "Besides, what are the odds?" Sophie climbed onto the chair, her legs dangling far above the floor. Her expression never wavered. "White moves first," she said softly. Richard chuckled and slid his palm forward. A few guests clapped mockingly, but when Sophie's reply came sharp and deliberate, the tone of the onlookers shifted. By the third move, Richard narrowed his eyes, realizing she hadn't picked randomly. By the sixth, his smirk had faltered. The laughter died into silence. Then it happened. Her knight leapt across the board, pinning his queen against his king. Richard felt his chest tighten, the bourbon's warmth cooling in his veins. His hand hovered, suddenly unsure. The girl sat straight-backed, her brown eyes calm, fearless, as though she'd been waiting for this exact moment. The guests leaned closer, holding their breath. Richard, master of billion-dollar negotiations, found himself cornered by a child with dangling feet and an unshakable stare. His grin had vanished, replaced by something rare for him: disbelief. In that suspended silence, Sophie whispered her move with the quiet certainty of someone who already knew the outcome. Check. The night air hung heavy on the terrace, filled with the muted rustle of silk gowns and the faint clink of glasses forgotten in midair. Richard Harrington, who had stared down competitors with billion-dollar fortunes at stake, now found his throat dry and his pulse oddly unsteady. The antique queen stood trapped on the board, hemmed in by a 7-year-old girl whose feet didn't even reach the terrace floor. He blinked once, twice, trying to shake off the absurdity of it, but the truth sat there in polished mahogany squares. He was cornered. The crowd shifted, their amusement now laced with something else: an easy curiosity. The child was no longer just a diversion. She was unsettling. Richard leaned back, trying to recover his composure, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Beginner's luck," he murmured, though the words tasted false on his tongue. Sophie said nothing. Her tiny fingers moved with precision, pushing the bishop into place as though guided by an invisible map. The silence grew heavier. Anna's voice cut through it, hushed but urgent. "Mr. Harrington, please, she's just a child. Let's end this before." Richard raised a hand, though not with his earlier confidence. "No," he said, almost to himself. "Let's see where this goes." The game pressed forward. Each of his attempts to break free met with quiet resistance. Her movements were deliberate, her gaze unwavering. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. Richard felt something alien bloom in his chest, a creeping awareness that he wasn't the one in control. When her rook slid across the board, boxing in yet another of his pieces, he felt the first trickle of sweat at his temple. By the 10th move, the once mocking crowd had thinned, guests drifting away under the weight of discomfort. What had begun as entertainment now felt almost voyeuristic. A billionaire being systematically dismantled by a child. It wasn't funny anymore. It was unsettling. The only figures who remained were Anna, stiff as a statue, and Sophie, calm as moonlight. "Where did you learn that move?" Richard asked, his voice low, almost hoarse. Sophie's answer was simple. "Mom taught me." He looked up at Anna then, really looked. The serving tray in her hand trembled slightly, but her eyes were the same as Sophie's, sharp, measuring, almost as if they were playing the games at once. Mother and daughter bound by some unspoken language across the table. "Checkmate," Sophie whispered, nudging his king until it toppled and rolled across the marble floor. The sound was louder than it should have been, echoing in Richard's ears like a gavel striking. He stared at the fallen piece, unable to speak, his lips parted, but no words emerged. Instead, a strange laugh escaped him, raw, unpolished, nothing like the smooth chuckle he used in boardrooms. He had been beaten, not by another mogul or strategist, but by a little girl with braids and dangling legs. He leaned closer, studying Sophie as though she were a puzzle no algorithm could solve. "Where did you really learn to play like that?" Sophie's smile was small, proud, and disarmingly innocent. "Mom's the best player in the world. She just doesn't let people know." The words struck like lightning. Richard's gaze snapped back to Anna. Her face was still, but her knuckles widened around the tray until her skin looked paper thin. The silence between them crackled with an energy far greater than the game they just played. He noticed, for the first time, the faint calluses on her fingertips, the kind not earned from cleaning marble floors or folding linen, but from sliding wooden pieces across endless boards, over and over, until muscle memory carved itself into skin. 1,000 hours, maybe more. The realization crawled up his spine. "You're not just Anna Wilson, are you?" he asked, his voice quiet, but edged with something sharper. Anna's eyes flickered just for a second, before she tore them away. "I should get Sophie to bed." But Sophie wasn't done. Her small hand toppled the last standing piece on the board, the queen, sending it tumbling toward Anna's feet. She looked up at Richard with the unshakable certainty only a child could have. "She really is the best," Sophie said, and then she slipped her hand into her mother's and let herself be led inside, leaving Richard alone under the chandelier's glow, alone with the shattered certainty of a man who thought he had seen everything, only to discover he had just met his greatest opponent and perhaps his greatest mystery. The house was quiet long after the last champagne glass had been cleared away, yet Richard Harrington could not sleep. He paced the length of his study, the city skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like another chessboard stretched to infinity. His bourbon sat untouched on the desk. The ice melted into pale water. For once, alcohol did nothing to soothe the gnawing restlessness inside him. The echo of a small voice haunted him still. "Mom's the best player in the world." He replayed the game in his mind, move for move, as if examining a corporate takeover gone wrong. He hadn't simply lost, he had been outmaneuvered, disassembled, humiliated, not by chance, but by skill. And if Sophie had that kind of precision at 7 years old, what of her teacher, his maid, the woman who had folded napkins in silence, who had blended into the background of his mansion so thoroughly he rarely considered her existence? Beyond efficiency, he stopped pacing and stared at the grand oak bookshelf. Something was wrong, something he had missed. Richard pulled out his tablet and began searching. The name Anna Wilson yielded nothing beyond employment records and a background check as shallow as a puddle. But when he searched women, chess prodigies disappeared. 6 years ago. Results began to pour in like threads of a tapestry unraveling. There she was, Elizabeth Winters. Photographs of a younger woman, slimmer, with the same unyielding gaze as Anna, sitting behind chessboards across Europe, trophies at her side, tournament after tournament, win after win. She had been called the silent queen of prodigy who never spoke during games, who demolished opponents with eerie calm. The headline shifted suddenly in 2016. Cheating allegations rock world championship. Silent queen disappears after Moscow scandal, then silence. As though the earth had swallowed her whole, Richard leaned back, the glow of the screen casting harsh shadows across his face. He remembered her knuckles tightening around that serving tray. The way she had avoided his question. Not Anna Wilson at all. Elizabeth Winters, shamed, erased, reborn under another name. The sound of footsteps pulled him from the screen. He turned, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her uniform neat as always, her hands steady despite the storm in her eyes. She set his coffee down on the desk with practiced calm, though she must have known he hadn't slept. How long? Have you known? She asked softly, her voice stripped of all pretense. Since last night. Richard admitted. He swiveled the screen toward her, displaying the frozen image of a younger Elizabeth holding a gleaming trophy. 15 championships, 3 world records. You disappeared, and somehow you ended up cleaning my house. Anna's lips pressed into a thin line. That life is over. Why? Richard's voice sharpened. What really happened in Moscow? For a moment, he thought she might retreat, but then her shoulders straightened and something fierce flickered in her eyes. I didn't cheat, she said, her tone carved in steel. But when the accusations came, I had a 6-month-old child and no allies. Fighting would have meant years of courtrooms, lawyers, headlines. I couldn't risk it. I chose to vanish. And the man behind it, Richard pressed. Who wanted you gone? Anna's jaw tightened. Victor Renault, president of the Chess Federation, my former lover, Sophie's father. The word father carried no warmth, only venom. He promised he would leave his wife. Instead, when I threatened to expose his manipulation, he destroyed me. And no one in that world wanted to believe a woman over him. The silence between them grew heavy, filled with the hum of the city below. Richard, for all his billions, felt a strange helplessness. Here was a woman who had fought her way across the globe, with only her mind as a weapon, undone not by weakness but by betrayal. She hadn't just hidden, she had sacrificed everything for her daughter. You're not invisible anymore, Richard said finally, his voice low. You can't be, not after what Sophie did last night. Anna's expression faltered for just a breath, fear slipping through the cracks. He'll know, Victor. He'll see her play, her style. He'll know she's his. And in that moment Richard realized the truth. The chess game at his gala hadn't been a joke at all. It had been the first move in a larger, darker contest. A contest not just for money or prestige, but for a child's future. He leaned across the desk, his voice carrying a weight he hadn't felt in years. Then we play back, and this time, Anna, we make sure the king falls. The storm began with a whisper, 2 weeks after Sophie's impossible victory. Richard Harrington sat in his glass-walled office high above Seattle, staring at the scrolling headlines on his monitor. The news feeds flickered like flames, each headline hotter than the last. Elizabeth Winters cheating prodigy in hiding? Disgraced chess queen resurfaces at Billionaire's mansion. Mystery child matches prodigy's style. His jaw clenched as he read. The gala had been private. Guests had signed non-disclosure agreements, and yet the story had spread like gasoline meeting a spark. Someone had leaked it, and Richard already knew who. The timing was too precise. The whispers to sharp-dot Victor Renault. Richard's phone buzzed. A message from his security chief, Renault cited. In Zurich 2 days ago, flew to New York yesterday. Now untraceable. Invisible men were dangerous. Invisible men with power were lethal. Downstairs in the mansion's sunlit library, Anna sat across from Sophie, their heads bent together over a chessboard. Sophie's small brow furrowed in concentration as Anna whispered encouragement to anyone else. It was a tender scene of mother and daughter, but Richard saw the tension beneath Anna's calm exterior, the stiffness in her shoulders, the flick of her eyes toward the window every few minutes. She was bracing for impact, waiting for the past to kick the door down. That night, the impact came. Richard returned late from a meeting, his car crunching up the long gravel drive. When he noticed the front gates ajar, the Harrington estate gates, never stood open, not with his security protocols. His stomach dropped. He sprinted inside, calling Anna's name. He found her in the foyer, pale as marble, clutching her phone. Sophie sat on the stairs clutching her stuffed night chess piece, wide-eyed but unhurt. Anna looked up at him, voice trembling. He called. Richard froze. Victor. She nodded. He said he knows. He knows she's his. He said. Her throat closed. Richard took the phone from her shaking hands. On the screen was a text, short and poisonous. Your pawn looks promising, but pawns can be taken. Soon she will take her rightful place by her father's side. Prepare yourself, Elizabeth. Elizabeth. He was stripping away her alias, her shield. Richard's chest burned. He won't touch her, not while I'm alive. But Anna's eyes told him she didn't believe safety was possible. You don't understand. He has judges, sponsors, the Federation itself in his pocket. He buried me once with nothing but lies. With Sophie, he won't even need lies. He'll claim his rights, and they'll hand her over to him. Not if we fight, Richard said, his voice like steel. I built an empire against men just like him. This time, we use my empire for you. Anna shook her head violently. No, you don't know Victor. He doesn't fight in daylight. He'll use shadows, whispers. He'll make me look unstable, unfit. He'll ruin Sophie's life just to punish me. Her words hung in the air like a curse. Sophie, who had been silent until now, spoke softly from the stairs. Are we hiding again, Mom? The question gutted Anna. She closed her eyes, tears brimming. Because her daughter was too perceptive, the child had already understood what a lifetime of running looked like. Richard crouched to Sophie's level, his voice gentle but steady. No, sweetheart, no more hiding. Your mom taught you how to face the board, didn't she? We're going to face this one, too. The child's gaze flicked between her mother and Richard. Then she nodded once, serious as a soldier preparing for battle. Later that night, as Sophie slept curled against Anna, Richard stood at the window of his study, phone pressed to his ear. He called in favors he had never thought he'd use for her. Intelligence officers, investigative journalists, legal powerhouses, men and women who owed him for contracts, rescues, secrets. Victor Renault. Richard said into the receiver. Find everything, every deal, every scandal, every weakness, leave no stone unturned. The city lights glittered below like a million chess squares, and Richard, for the first time in years, felt alive not because of the game, but because he finally had something worth protecting. But deep inside, he knew this was no ordinary match. Victor wasn't coming for money. He wasn't even coming for reputation. He was coming for Sophie. A man like Victor didn't play fair. Richard's fingers tightened around the glass of bourbon he never drank. This wasn't business anymore. This was war. And somewhere across the ocean, Victor Renault sat in the shadows of a Parisian cafe, a glass of red wine untouched at his elbow, a dossier open before him. On the cover was a photo of Anna's face, and beside it, Sophie's, his daughter. His lips curled into the faintest smile. Check, he murmured. The convention center buzzed with the chatter of hundreds of families, the air thick with anticipation and the faint smell of coffee and sharpened pencils. The Northwestern Children's Chess Open was the kind of event Richard Harrington had never imagined attending, yet here he was, seated in a corner of the hall that looked more like a battlefield than a children's tournament. Rows of little warriors hunched over boards, their eyes gleaming with focus far beyond their years. Cameras flashed as proud parents whispered strategies, coaches adjusted ties and ponytails, and referees moved silently like priests guarding the sanctity of the game. Richard's security team blended into the crowd in plain clothes, though he knew each was wired, armed, and vigilant. He had doubled their numbers without telling Anna, a precaution she would have rejected, but one he refused to compromise on. Somewhere, Victor Renault would be watching. He always watched. Anna stood beside Sophie at the registration desk, her posture straight, her navy blazer simple yet elegant. No trace of the Maid uniform remained. She looked every bit like the woman Richard had discovered in the archives, Elizabeth Winters, the silent queen, but her jaw was tight, her smile forced, and her eyes darted every time a stranger glanced along at her daughter. Sophie, however, seemed immune to the tension. She bounced on her toes, clutching her participant badge proudly, her hair in neat braids and her small chest puffed out with pride. Mom, Sophie whispered as they walked to her table. What if I lose? Anna knelt, cupping her daughters. Face gently, then you lose, she said, but you lose with your head high. Chess is not about never falling, it's about how you rise again. Richard watched the exchange from a few steps away, something tightening in his chest. He had seen CEOs beg for his mercy in negotiations. Presidents of nations flatter him for investments. Yet here was a 7-year-old girl looking at her mother as though her words were scripture. The first match began. Sophie's opponent was a boy nearly twice her size. His eyes narrowed with the arrogance of someone told to often that he was destined for greatness. Richard leaned closer, curious to see if Sophie's brilliance would hold in public. It did. Within 15 minutes, her opponent was sweating, his pawns scattered like fallen soldiers. Her moves were precise, unhesitating, merciless. She played with the quiet ferocity of a storm rolling across an open plain. When the boy toppled his king in resignation, Richard felt a ripple of awe move through the crowd. Whispers began, people nudging one another. That's the girl from the Harrington Gala. Her style, it's winter style. Anna's hand tightened on her purse strap, her knuckles white. She knew those whispers were seeds, and seeds had a way of sprouting into storms. By Sophie's third victory, cameras had gathered, and livestream feeds buzzed across social media. Headlines bloomed online faster than Richard's PR team could react. Prodigy emerges at Northwestern Open. The Silent Queen's legacy? That was when Richard felt it, that icy prickle at the back of his neck, the predator's gaze. He scanned the crowd and found him, Victor Renault, standing just beyond the ropes with two men in dark suits, his hair, streaked with silver, gleamed under the fluorescent lights. His smile was a knife. Anna saw him too, her face drained of color. She reached for Sophie instinctively, but Richard was already at her side. Stay calm, he murmured, his hand brushing hers just long enough to steady her. My team has him covered. Victor raised a hand as though in casual greeting, his eyes fixed on Sophie. The girl looked up, caught the stare, and froze. There was something in her blood that recognized him, genetics pulling threads she didn't understand. Is that? She whispered. Anna pulled her close. No one important, baby. Just focus on your game. But Victor didn't stop. He moved closer, ignoring the officials, his voice carrying across the hall. Where's my daughter? The room fell into a stunned silence. Dozens of phones tilted upward, recording, streaming, amplifying. Anna's heart raced so hard she thought it might shatter. Sophie clutched her mother's waist, her small body trembling. Richard stepped forward, blocking Victor's path. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. You'll speak through lawyers, Renault. Not here. Not now. Victor's smile widened, cold and elegant. Lawyers are already waiting. Harrington, custody filings, emergency motions. The world will know soon enough what kind of woman you've been protecting. Anna's knees threatened to give, but she straightened, fire flickering in her eyes. No, she said, her voice steady despite the quake in her chest. The world will know what kind of man you are. The tension was electric, the crowd whispering furiously, reporters scribbling, cameras flashing. Richard felt the pieces sliding into place on a board larger than the one in front of Sophie. The tournament wasn't the game anymore, it was the battlefield. That night, as headlines blared across televisions and phones, Chess Federation president claims prodigy daughter, scandal reignited, winners versus Renault. Richard sat in his study with Anna. Sophie slept upstairs, exhausted from her matches. The papers lay strewn across his desk. Legal notices, smear articles, half-truths crafted to destroy Anna's credibility. Anna stared at them, her face pale, but her jaw set. He's using the system against me again. He'll twist every move until I'm the villain. Richard placed his hand over hers, the gesture uncharacteristically intimate. Then we don't just fight him in court. We fight him in the light, where shadows can't win. Anna looked up, her eyes tired but fierce. And what if he comes for her directly? What if he takes her? Richard's voice dropped. Steal and promise all at once. Then I burn down everything he stands on. He will never touch her, not while I breathe. Neither of them knew then how close Victor already was, how deep his reach extended, how soon the battle would turn into something far darker. For even as they sat in that quiet study, Sophie's face already graced screens across Europe and Asia. Victor's lawyers had filed emergency petitions, and in a luxury suite in New York, Victor Renault poured himself a glass of wine, watching Sophie's live stream on his tablet. She plays like me, he murmured, his voice thick with satisfaction. But she's mine, and soon, Elizabeth, You'll understand kings never fall. The rain lashed against the Harrington estate that night, a steady, relentless drumming that rattled the windows and soaked the sprawling gardens in sheets of silver. Inside, the mansion was unusually quiet. Too quiet. Sophie had gone to bed early, worn out after another day of practice and whispered conversations about custody battles she was too young to understand. Anna hovered near her door for nearly an hour, her hand on the frame, listening to the soft rhythm of her daughter's breathing. She didn't trust silence anymore. Silence felt like the pause before a knife cut. Richard was in his study, hunched over glowing monitors, the weight of the world pressing against his shoulders. His security chief stood nearby, reporting in clipped tones. Every camera feed live. Perimeter sealed. Men posted at all entry points. No sign of breach. Yet Richard's instinct screamed otherwise. Years of climbed his way through the ruthless world of technology and power had honed a sixth sense. And right now that sense was blaring like an alarm. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the air. Then it happened. A knock, faint but sharp, echoed from the grand front door. The guard snapped to attention. Richard's chest tightened. Few people ever dared knock at his fortress unannounced. He signaled, and the camera zoomed in. A delivery man stood on the porch, soaked to the bone, clutching a small brown package. His cap shadowed his face. Expecting anything, sir? The chief asked. Richard shook his head. Open it carefully. The guards descended, flanking the man, their weapons discreet but ready. The package was scanned, cleared, and brought inside. Richard slid it open himself. No explosives, no wires, only a sleek black box. Inside, a single chess piece, hand-carved. Ivory white, a queen, its crown cracked. Richard's blood ran cold. He knew instantly what it meant. Anna appeared in the study doorway, her face pale, her eyes already filled with dread. Where's Sophie? She whispered. They rushed upstairs. The bed was empty, the sheets still warm. The window open just a crack, rain dripping onto the carpet. Anna's scream tore through the halls like shattering glass. Richard grabbed the phone, barking orders. Lock every airport, every dock, every crossing, now. But even as he spoke, the house security pulled up the feed. 7 minutes of static. A loop recording of Sophie asleep in her bed, played back over and over. Someone had bypassed their system with surgical precision. A tablet chimed. Anna's phone. One new video message. Her hand shook so violently she could barely hold it. Richard steadied her as she pressed play. The screen flickered to life. Sophie sat in a dimly lit hotel room, her small face pale, but composed. A chessboard stood before her, pieces arranged mid-game. Off camera, a voice spoke, smooth and chilling. Your move, Elizabeth. Victor Renault stepped into the frame, his silver-streaked hair gleaming under the light. His smile that of a predator who had waited patiently for his prey to stumble. He placed his hand on Sophie's shoulder with casual possession, making Anna's stomach lurch. Bring yourself to the Fairmont Hotel, Suite 1412. Victor continued. Come alone. If you try anything clever, the game ends before it begins. He lifted one of Sophie's pawns and crushed it between his fingers, until it splintered. You have until midnight. The video ended. Anna collapsed into a chair, her entire body trembling. Richard knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. We'll get her back. I swear to you. Anna's eyes, wild with fear, locked on his. He'll use her as bait. He wants me broken. He'll never let her go. Richard's voice was low, iron wrapped in fire. That we don't play his game. We change the board. Within the hour, the mansion turned into a command center. Maps, camera, feeds, secure lines open to law enforcement. Richard summoned resources that most governments would envy. Former operatives with military backgrounds, cybersecurity teams capable of cracking international banking systems. They would blanket the city like a net. But Anna was the key. She knew Victor's mind better than anyone. She had played him across countless boards, in tournaments and in life. His arrogance, his need to control, his obsession with legacy had all pointed to one thing. He wanted a grand performance. A spectacle that would cement his dominance over her forever. At 11:30 p.m., Anna stood in the Harrington foyer, dressed, not as the maid she had once been, but in a simple black suit that fit her like armor. Her hair was tied back, her expression calm but deadly. Richard walked her to the waiting car, flanked by his men. He caught her hand just before she stepped out. You don't go in there alone, he said firmly. I have to, Anna replied, If he sees you, he'll panic. Sophie could. Her voice cracked, but she forced it steady. This is between him and me. Richard cupped her face briefly, his thumb brushing the tears she fought to hide. Then remember this, you're not his pawn anymore. You're the queen, and queens never fall. Her eyes softened for just a moment. Then she pulled away, still returning to her posture. The car pulled into the storm, headlights cutting through the rain. The city loomed ahead, the Fairmont's towers glowing like the walls of a fortress. Somewhere inside, Sophie waited. Somewhere inside, Victor smiled. And in that moment, as Anna prepared to face the man who had destroyed her life once before, Richard Harrington swore to himself, this time, the game would not end in her defeat. This time, the checkmate would belong to them. The elevator chimed softly as it opened on the 12th floor of the Fairmont. Anna stepped out alone, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The long hallway stretched before her, lined with closed doors, each one identical yet one of them held her daughter, sweet 1412. She could feel it like a heartbeat pulling her forward. The storm outside rattled the glass panes, lightning illuminating the walls in pale blue flashes. Every flicker of light reminded her of the chessboard Victor had placed her on 6 years ago, trapped, cornered, silenced. But this time, she told herself, she would not break. Two men in dark suits stood before the suite door, their stances rigid, their eyes impassive. Victor's men. They patted her down mechanically, checked her bag, and exchanged a brief nod before opening the door. Inside, one muttered. Anna walked in, her breath steady, but her pulse racing. The suite was opulent, lit by golden sconces and a massive chandelier that dripped with crystal. But the centerpiece was grotesque, a chess table in the middle of the room, spotlighted as if for an audience. On one side sat Sophie, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes wide but determined. On the other side, waiting like a spider at the center of his web, was Victor Renault. He rose smoothly, his tailored suit catching the light, his smile as sharp as glass. Elizabeth. He greeted, savoring the old name like a weapon. Or, shall I call you Anna now? I confess, I prefer Elizabeth. So much more. Regal. Anna ignored the barb and rushed to Sophie, kneeling to grip her daughter's hands. Are you hurt? Baby? Sophie shook her head quickly. I'm okay, Mom. Her brave voice trembled at the edges. He made me play practice games. Anna's jaw tightened. She turned to Victor, her fury simmering. This ends tonight. Give her back. Victor chuckled, gesturing to the board, so quick to negotiate without even seeing the terms. You always did underestimate the value of spectacle, Elizabeth. Sit. One game. That's all I ask. I'm not here to play, she snapped. Oh, but you are. Victor purred, settling back into his chair. This is how it was always meant to be, you and me. One last match. If you win, Sophie leaves. With you, if you lose, he paused, letting the words drip like poison. She stays with me. Her true father. Sophie gasped, clutching her mother's sleeve. Anna's stomach twisted, but she forced her face into calm neutrality. You're delusional, she said evenly. Sophie is not your prize. She's not a pawn in your legacy. Victor's grin widened. On the contrary, she's the queen I've always wanted. Anna swallowed hard. She knew refusing the game could put Sophie in immediate danger. But she also knew Victor's ego, his obsession with proving himself. If she agreed, she could buy time, buy the space for Richard's team, waiting in the shadows of the hotel. To move into place. Fine, she said, lowering herself into the chair across from him. But this time, Victor, you play against the woman you tried to destroy, not the ghost you created. He arched a brow, intrigued. How poetic. He reached forward and pushed his pawn forward to squares. Your move. The game began. Victor played aggressively, his pieces surging forward with brute force. Anna countered cautiously at first, feigning hesitation, giving him the illusion of dominance. He smirked with each captured piece, leaning back in smug satisfaction. Motherhood has dulled your edge, he taunted. You used to be sharp, ruthless. Now you look tired. Anna forced herself to appear rattled, even as her mind worked 3 moves ahead. She knew Victor's patterns. He favored early aggression. Psychological warfare meant to overwhelm, but arrogance always blinded him to subtlety. Slowly, she began weaving traps inch by inch. Sophie, standing just behind her, watched in silence, her small fist clenched. Richard's words echoed in Anna's mind. You're not his pawn anymore. You're the queen. Then came the turning point. Victor lunged with his queen, certain of his dominance. But Anna's rook slid across the board in one clean motion. Gasps filled the room from Victor's guards as his queen fell, trapped with nowhere to run. His smile faltered for the first time. His eyes narrowed. Clever, he admitted, his tone tight. But you won't finish me. Anna leaned forward, her voice low, deliberate. I already did. 6 years ago, I had the winning move. You framed me because you couldn't stand being beaten by a woman. Tonight, I finished what you stole from me. Her knight leapt forward, locking his king in a tightening noose. 2 moves later, she whispered the word that tasted like justice itself. Checkmate. The board was silent. Then chaos erupted. The door crashed open. Richard's security team stormed in, followed by federal agents. Victor surged to his feet, roaring in outrage. This is illegal. She was supposed to come alone. Richard entered behind the agents, his presence like thunder rolling into the room. You made the mistake of thinking the rules only applied to your game, Renault. This is mine. The agents closed in. Victor Renault, you are under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy, and fraud. Victor struggled, his mask cracking at last, his eyes wild with hatred as the cuffs snapped around his wrists. This isn't over, Elizabeth. I'll destroy you. Anna stood tall, her hand gripping Sophie's. Her voice rang with steel. You already tried, and you lost. Richard crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling both Anna and Sophie into the shelter of his arms. He looked down at Sophie, whose brave little face finally broke into tears against his chest. You're safe now, he whispered. It's over. But Anna knew it wasn't just over, it was transformed. The game that had once stripped her of everything had now given her more than she ever thought possible. A second chance, a family, a future not defined by fear. The next morning, as headlines blazed across every screen, Renault arrested in kidnapping plot. Silent Queen returns to reclaim her crown. Richard stood at the breakfast table with Anna and Sophie. The 3 of them sat not as master and maid, not as strangers tied by scandal, but as something new, something stronger. Richard lifted his coffee cup, his eyes locked with Anna's. You know, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Last night felt less like an ending and more like the first real move. Anna held his gaze, her hand resting gently over Sophie's. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile. Then let's see how far we can play this game. And as the rain finally broke into sunlight across the city, Sophie leaned into her mother and whispered with all the innocence of a child who had faced monsters and won. Checkmate, Mom.